This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook, and I have my type of CEO because he's a JD, MBA. He was driven by Jewish guilt. Josh Luber, welcome, CEO and co-founder of StockX.
Man, this is the first interview I've done that started with Jewish guilt. A lot of them end that way, but this is the first one that starts that way.
That's what sets me apart. I'm living my truth. Speaking of which, you said something I read about being a CEO, and that you are a master, what is it? Great of everything, master
Jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah.
And I've always been that type. Our lives have paralleled a lot from the Midwest, but it does make a great CEO.
Yeah, well, the alternative is unemployed, right? Like you're either a CEO or employed. You're not a master enough to do, So yeah.
And you even did that in school. Like you were talking, you were just going to go to business school, and then you're like, I'll just add a law degree in there as well because more mastery.
That's an interesting one. There's a lot of reasons why I ended up going to law school. I was going back to business school anyway. I was working at a company called Nationwide Warehouse, which was basically a low-end furniture company based in Atlanta. And I was a merchant there, and the company went through bankruptcy. And being a merchant, all of a sudden I was sort of frontline for all of the vendors that were all creditors. And so all of a sudden I was like this 23-year-old kid, like right in the middle of this, multi-hundred million dollar bankruptcy. And bankruptcy is the natural convergence of business and law. And that was the first time that I'd ever seen a version of law different than my father, who was a tax attorney, and what was relatively boring and, you sort of...
very boring. It's not relative, it's very boring. Let's be honest.
Exactly. And so, anyway, so all those sort of things converged, and I swear to God, and this will either make me sound like a complete jackass or really interesting, is I had already taken the LSAT, because my best friend from high school had taken the LSAT the year before, and I thought I could beat him. And I was like, I'm gonna do this anyway, and I had taken the LSAT the year before, and I did not beat him, but I ended up with a really good score. So I already had a good score, the LSAT, and I wasn't planning on going to law school at that time.
Wow.
I literally, you're a hyper-competitive, 23-year-old, and that's just how it goes.
Where did the hyper-competitive, I believe hyper-competitiveness is one of the traits of success because it allows you to be consistent in what you do, and it lets the universe, in my opinion, guide you because you just do crazy stuff because you're so competitive, but it's really, I think, a form of allowance. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think part of that is innate, right? Like my brother's 4 years younger than me, and we have all of basically the same interests, but he's the exact opposite, right? I used to tell people, my brother's just like me, except he's a lot nicer, right? And
I got one of those.
Yeah, and my brother's not a rabbi, by the way.
Okay, good.
But he works for StockX, he was the very first person I went and hired. But I grew up playing sports, but I think part of that is it's just innate. It's sort of like who you are, and if you're like the jerk that was always trying to win in Monopoly, and hiding money under your the board, I don't know, right? I don't think you ever plan that. It just sort of happens.
What I find about competitiveness and running a sports agency around the greatest athletes of all time, they're innately, my business partner Warren Moon is the most hyper competitive person I've ever met. But one thing I've noticed is that people that aren't innately hyper competitive, it almost can't be learned. You can't turn the switch on, but you absolutely can turn the switch off. Whether it's Mike Tyson that I've met, who absolutely he turned the switch off. Myself, I'm the kid that threw the checkerboard at people, and I literally would cheat and do whatever I could to win. And now I've lost whatever that was. I just don't have it in me anymore for most of my life. There's sometimes I can still turn it on.
Yep. But I think part of that, there is an element of just maturity of growing and
controlling it more.
But honestly, it's almost. I don't want to make this a negative, but it's almost if you can understand the longer game better and where that'll serve you better to not be hyper competitive, right? To concede the smaller wins, to be more conciliatory in those manners. Because once you see the hyper competitiveness start to impact what you're trying to win or what you're trying to do, right? And I think that just comes from maturity and experience to understand that you don't have to win every single one. You don't have to win necessarily this specific conflict at that time. And I think that helps as well. Also, getting married and having kids, that sort of helps too,
Right.
because like you know people that check you on a daily basis. So
One thing about law school and business school, with all the different case law and situational knowledge that you get to witness by reading all these stories, is that you start understanding what I believe is the polarity of every strength in a different place is a weakness, like competitive, or even every weakness can be a strength if you move it to another place. Looking in what, as an entrepreneur, a student of entrepreneur, watching what you did, you kind of took a weakness in the marketplace where everyone thought it was completely controlled, where you now, co-founding with Gilbert, I look and say, people ask me who could take over for, Amazon, who could take Amazon out? Well, StockX. You literally could take them out. Can you explain though, because most people don't understand that marketplace.
Yeah.
Can you explain how you took what I see as a weakness, an overcrowded marketplace and a completely saturated, huge business, and completely turned it into a strength?
Yeah, I don't think that we necessarily take Amazon out, but there's a third business here. There's a third business model that at some point sits alongside the other two that we know. So the two business models we're most familiar with from marketplaces is eBay and Amazon. And notwithstanding eBay's troubles and where they are compared to Amazon, those two models will always continue to exist, right? So eBay is great if you want that long tail, unique, one-of-a-kind item, right? You want a Led Zeppelin t-shirt from 1972, like great, like eBay's a great place to find that. And those products will never sell on StockX because there's no liquidity.
Or Amazon.
Right? Well, for sure they won't sell on Amazon either. But in StockX generally, those one-of-a-kind, unique stuff, there's no market for a one-of-one.
Right.
Amazon will always be better for things that are purely commoditized. So paper towels, toothpaste, Cheerios, right? Like things that have essentially infinite supply, right? They will make as many Cheerios as people will buy. And so it's okay that Cheerios have a retail price. Cheerios cost $4 a box, will make as many people eat.
I would say anything P&G buys or sells, right?
Absolutely, that for sure, that fits into it as well, right? And so we won't touch those products either. But everything in the middle, from supplies to anything that's finite supply, this is a supply and demand constrained marketplace where you need to understand supply and demand to get to what the true value of that product should be. The Led Zeppelin t-shirt is just whatever one person will pay, no problem, there's only one of them. Cheerios, $4 a box, cost plus, whatever it is. But your watch, almost all consumer goods, the products that we sell, sneakers, streetwear, watches, handbags, collectibles, wine, anything that has a finite amount of that product that exists, that is supply and demand. And StockX is just a better model to figure out how to price and trade those products, better than eBay, better than Amazon. And the best part about this is that we didn't make it up, right? All we did was copy the way the stock market works in order to come to this concept of true market price, right? What is a fair market price for a share of Nike stock? You never worry about it. Nike's trading at whatever, $70, and that's the fair price for it. That's what we're doing for consumer goods. And so we don't necessarily take out Amazon in the future state, but you sit alongside as a third form of marketplace that takes all of those products away from eBay and Amazon. By the way, there's way more products that will sit in those two at eBay and Amazon, those models. And that's okay, there's still a whole lot in the middle.
Yeah, billions of dollars of product. People buy on emotion for logical reasons, and people will ask me all the time, Dave, what should I sell this for? What I like about StockX is it takes all the emotional aspect into account as a variable, right? Just like the stock market does. And yet, it gives the ultimate answer to what something should be sold for because it's what someone's willing to pay for it.
Yep.
That's the perceived value in reality.
Yeah, and what the market is willing to pay for it. And that, that's a key distinction. But to your point, the first thing, it absolutely takes emotion into it. And the gut reaction is, well, it shouldn't or it can't, pricing can't take emotion into it. But it does. It's just a part of demand, right? This is again, it's just supply and demand. I mean, this is Econ 101, like at its most basic, right? This is like prereq classes for business school. And emotion is just one small piece of demand, right? Supply is frankly the easy part. We know supply is however many widgets the brands and the companies make. But demand, we've never had a good way to understand true consumer demand for products. Demand is always an estimate off of last year. It's a forecast. It's however many sales we want to hit. Like there was no true form of it. But in the stock market and on StockX, people have bids, and they can bid whatever they want to pay. And that's tied to someone's PayPal or their credit card, so that it's like perhaps the truest form of consumer demand. And what's encountered in that is people's emotions and their history and their ties to it. Not only how much they want this, but what else goes into that. And that's a really, really unique position, and that's why it's been successful.
And as a hyper successful entrepreneur, one of the things I think is interesting about law school is I always saw there's two types of people that went to law school. There's the ones that completely limit their point of entry. Like they have it charted out. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to work for Casey Wasserman and become CEO of Leigh Steinberg, right? Like they have it all charted out. And then there's guys like you and I that never limit our point of entry and end up partnering with some of the biggest names in the world. And some people call it manifestation. I don't, right? Like I think that allowance side is a hyper aggressive, hyper competitive aspect of after you've done all the work that you're supposed to do, that you have this will of somehow attracting or recognizing or being aware of an opportunity. One of the most extraordinary things about you is who your co-founder is, just like me, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, it's Gilbert's guy. I'm Moore and Moon's guy for years, right? It's hard to brand yourself. But I think it's important for people to know, how do you think you attracted Dan Gilbert as your business partner?
Yeah, that goes to a kind of a higher level question. A lot of people ask some version of, like, what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs or business people or younger? And my advice is always two things, and they're the most basic two things, and this gets to sort of how I ended up meeting Dan, but one is talk to everybody about everything, right? Ideas are worthless. Execution is the only thing that matters, right? Never show up and to someone who's going to spend time with you and have an NDA or like, by the way, if anyone is good enough that they can go steal your idea and go and build it, and they're not doing anything else, they're just sitting around, like, that's just not the reality, right? So it's important to talk to everybody, so you find business partners, you find, you refine your idea, you figure out, what to do about it. And the second, which is a related point and perhaps even more basic, is just do something, right? Like the idea that the plan has to be perfect, or you have to go find the perfect partner, like whatever you can do to be incrementally moving that forward. And for me, I basically built a price guide for sneakers where we were scraping eBay data in between startups. I was working for IBM, and so I just needed to be doing something. And if you're a startup guy and you go work at IBM, the first thing you do is you start working on stuff on the side, right? And so I was doing all this data work as a strategy consultant, and so I was like, man, I wonder if I get all of some sneaker data just to play with my own amusement, just to kind of see what I could do with it, because I was doing all this data work, and I've collected sneakers since I was probably 10. And so we figured out how to scrape eBay data, we figured out how to clean it, and build a price guide. We built a company that was called Campless, and Campless was a play off of the fact that people camp out for sneakers, right? So our tagline was, no more camp less. I was very proud of how witty my slogan was. But nice. But the idea was, like, this was just the first time people were doing real analytics around the secondary market to create a price guide. And I had not only did I have no idea, I couldn't have even imagined that if I do this, it will lead to me meeting one of the most successful business people in the world who have the exact same idea as me, and that we will do this together. Like, that just doesn't happen. But there was something here, and so I was like, listen, we just got to get this out into the world. And there was no fancy website. I created a blog, and I was tweeting about it and just sharing this idea and this data with as many people as I could. And there's many steps in between, but each one of those leads to the fact that, like, it happened to be Dan had a very similar idea at the same time. And when he and his team started looking at the market, everything they saw was around Campless, because we were the only people doing that. And I couldn't have known that was going to attract him, but it set us up to be able to do that, and that was really the key.
And it's so interesting because people, I believe, have this misguided belief that you love what you do. That's a learned trade. And what happens is people think you work in the tennis shoe industry and I work in the sports industry, that that's the passion. Almost every person I know loves a sport of some kind,
yeah.
Right? And it's like so ridiculous. We're like, how do I get a job in sports? I'm like, what does that even mean? It's like, how do I get a job in tennis shoes? Yeah. We have to develop skills, knowledge, and then with the inspiration that we have, we apply it normally to what we love, right? So if you're like a foodie, you may have taken the exact same platform and applied it to, some sort of unique cuisine.
Yeah.
And so people try to, I think, reverse engineer it, and they say, and you didn't do this. I love tennis shoes, therefore I'm going to create a business about tennis shoes. You created a business and then applied it to the tennis shoes.
And it was almost the inverse, right? People ask that, and my first question is always that, I'm a startup guy first, right? Like, this is about the process, this is about building this business. It happens to be around sneakers. And by the way, it's called StockX and not SneakerX because it's about a lot more than sneakers.
Right.
The fact that we've grown so fast in sneakers and become the largest marketplace in the world for sneakers is almost a red herring, and and to some extent, hides the real power of the business. But for me personally, I've started 3 other startups before this that had nothing to do with sneakers, and almost intentionally so. Right, we were talking about earlier, sort of growing up at a time where it was doctor, lawyer, or rabbi, and those are the only
or failure.
Yeah, and so for me, the idea of chasing your passion in 1999 when I graduated college, the word entrepreneur didn't exist, right? The internet barely existed. So for me, the first 3 startups I started, I intentionally didn't go into what was one of my largest personal passions. Almost out of fear of creating a business that was just an excuse to play with sneakers, right? Because it certainly would have been what the look was on the outside. And so perhaps it's serendipitous that the most successful one is one where I finally actually did merge the 2, but it wasn't, it wasn't an intentional thing to go do that, right? It just happens.
That's super important, because when I graduated law school, I'm so old that Westlaw just started. So my choice was litigate oil and gas litigation, which my mom's super successful. This boy's gonna buy me a house and a car, to selling legal research online before online.
Yeah.
And my mom actually told me the internet was gonna be a fad and I better take the law job. That's before any entrepreneurs. Yeah. But I tell people all the time, they literally 9 months out of law school, I was a millionaire, and they were telling me how lucky I was and what a passion I had because I went to law school. And in my head, I'm like, this is such BS, because 9 months ago, everybody was literally looking at me going, this guy's crazy. How did you, law school, business school, dad's a tax lawyer, whatever culture you come from of guilt, both of us do, it's pretty insane to start off in the entrepreneur side and startups in 1999.
Yeah.
I was CEO of Samsung at that time, the phone division. They didn't even know what a smartphone was. They called it a convergence device. So I remember what entrepreneurship was like.
Didn't quite make it, did
it?
Yeah,
No, it didn't. It's not very smart. Not like your great quote. But for you, how did you fight the voices? Because that's a big part of being successful, is what other people think.
Yeah, it's worth noting that I've started 4 startups. One when I was single, one when I was married with no kids, one I was married with 1 kid, one I was married with 2 kids, right? And so, so it moves from your parents to your family pretty quickly. But what was important was, I met my wife in law school, and so regardless, even though I only
she's a lawyer as well.
Yeah, she's an immigration attorney. So, one of us can help people, the other can be the sort of unapologetic capitalist. But she knew from the moment that we met sort of who I was, and she knew that even though I graduated law school, and I just really enjoyed law school, and because of that I did really well, and I had the opportunity to go work at a really great law firm, and so and it was the peak of the law market. I think I made more than what first year associates make today, 13 years later. But my wife knew from that moment that this is not reality, right? And it was about that she understood that the voices weren't nearly as much, but it was also weighing that against just being smart around how you live and understanding that listen, we're going to save the money that we make at the law firm, and we're not going to, right? Because we both wanted to do, and that she was 100% behind that.
You're very smart for marrying for money. I appreciate that. No, I'm kidding. Last question. Your wife's gonna hate me. She doesn't even know me. I'm just kidding. Last question.
Yeah.
Side hustle.
Yeah.
Right. One thing that we both have in common is you went to law school, not necessarily to be a lawyer, right? You took the LSAT, not necessarily go to law school.
Yeah.
You started working at IBM, not necessarily to be a data analytic guy. People have problems with understanding how to have a side hustle and be able to transfer the hustle into the side hustle.
Yeah.
Can you give any advice on how to do that?
Well, first of all, there is so much time in a day. That, it is absolutely, and if you don't have kids, you have no excuse whatsoever, in terms of that.
Thank you, man. It's hard to understand the guys that work for you. You're
yeah.
Are you kidding me?
It's just unbelievable, right? There's so much time, in a day, and so back to it, it's just be doing something. There's something you can be doing that's more productive than watching TV or going to a movie or or going out, and that's really what it is. It's 100% time management and just understanding that. And for me, even with Campus that I started while at IBM, and at that time I was married, I had 1 kid. My wife understood enough that Campus was real enough that I had 2 legit full-time jobs. And she helped extraordinarily in the beginning with my daughter, my first child. But I was nearing this time where she was pregnant with our second child, and I knew that, okay, like at that point, that's not going to fly anymore. I didn't have to ask. Like at that point, now that I had 2 jobs and 1 kid, I was about to go to 2 jobs and 2 kids. And so you just understand of like where time management hits real roadblocks versus, perceived. But like there's just so much time in the day, and it's a little bit embarrassing when you hear people that don't have time to do stuff. If you don't have kids, like you have time to do it.
Yeah, and you look at things as productive and accessible. This has been just a wealth of knowledge. I'm a big fan and student of you. I look for guys of how they become successful, and it is just, I'm really excited about the next 20 years where you're going. So I appreciate you sharing your time with all the entrepreneurs, especially me.
Thank you.
Josh
I
Luber,
appreciate it.
Co-Founder, CEO of StockX, extraordinary entrepreneur. This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.